What was your first impression of Terrence when you met him?
Well, he was laying under a flowering bush in Big Sur, California at the Eschaton Institute, overlooking the ocean from a cliff several hundred feet high, and wearing these kind of weird Bootsy Collins sunglasses that made him look like some kind of large insect. And he was laid out like some kind of romantic poet under this bush reading something, and as we approached him, he said, "Come close, darlings, let's smoke some herb." And we walked up to him and sat down and started smoking pot and told him what we thought would be cool to do. You know, and he was completely relaxed and completely, available. He was there. He was present, and he was like, "What's going? Let's do it." Always was.
It reminds me a little of the caterpillar from Alice in Wonderland in some ways. You know, I mean, it's got that kind of feel. So you started off, and you guys had a meeting of the minds, and from that point forward, you spent a lot of time with him, and you produced Alien Dreamtime, which was, I thought, a staggering event. It was a great event. And it really, for me, and I think for a lot of other people, sort of, in some ways, catalyzed what was happening in San Francisco in the early to mid-'90s, where you had this amazing confluence of entheogenic substances and electronic music. And I wonder if you could just kind of maybe speak to, what your experience during that time was like for you.
Robert, I can't hear what you're saying.
Well, okay. Can you hear me now? I feel like we've devolved into a commercial. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So what was it like for you to be a part of this evolving rave culture in the mid-'90s?
You're out again, Robert.
All right. This is unfortunate. Let me try something else here, Ken. Hold on.
Okay.
I'm going to a different setup here. Maybe this will help. Okay, I am now on a headset. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
All right, great. So the reason I was not on a headset before is because I was, going to play the sound files, and I can still do that. I'll just have to reconfigure this kind of on the fly. So my question to you was, what was your experience like being in San Francisco, where you had this confluence of entheogens and techno music, and it was kind of a heady time, I think, for a lot of people, and there was a sense of possibility that was really kind of in the air. There was, you had this emerging technology, these emerging mind states. It's a very different vibe that exists now. What was your experience like back then?
Robert, I can't hear you. Did you ask a question?
I did. This is. I'm not sure why we're having such a hard time with the audio today. This is unfortunate. The question was. Maybe I should ask a different question, because I've asked the same question 4 times now. So maybe it's the question and not the audio. When you were working with Terrence one-on-one, can you just describe what the mood was like and how casual these encounters with him were, and yet some of the really enlightening moments that also went along with it?
I don't know what you asked me. I can't hear you hardly at all.
All right. Well, I'm not sure what to do. This is unfortunate. Hey, Ken?
Hey, Robert.
Yeah, hi. Sorry. I've been trying to kind of understand, what's going on the audio side, which is why I played that extended piece of music. Why don't you hang up and dial back in? Because there are other people that are listening to the show that are actually hearing me. So let's try and reconnect our line, okay?
Well, I did call in on another phone.
Okay. Can you hear me okay now?
Yeah, I hear you great now. It must have been on this side.
All right, great. So let's try to take this thing. Let's try to take another crack at this. All right. So for me, again, the where I kind of enter into this whole experience around around Terrence McKenna is Alien Dreamtime and that event. And for me, and I think for a lot of other people, it was a catalyst for this period. It was kind of an interesting period because it dovetails with the Clinton era, right? It's like sort of moving out of Bush into Clinton, and there's kind of more of a sense of positivity with Clinton. There's VC money coming into the Valley. There's development. There's the internet. And prior to all this, there's this really interesting convergence between electronic music and entheogens. It was kind of a heady time. And I was wondering if you could, kind of speak to that and speak to what your experience was like being in San Francisco and being a part of what I think is actually a very important time in our history.
Yeah, it was, and it was a wonderful time to live through. It was a difficult time to be involved in things that were contrary to a very dominant conservative culture that had come straight out of Reaganism. And the shift in the weather that Clinton brought about was really important, especially in a town like San Francisco where the AIDS epidemic was rampant. There was no respect being given to any of these issues that were piling up. So it felt like a relief for sure to have a breath of a new kind of political action going on. However much that might have ended up being a mirage, it was still part of the scene. But closer to what you're addressing here with McKenna and Alien Dreamtime, I think that what McKenna did at that time, and that excuse me, and I think is a helpful way of considering his contribution, he revalorized the psychedelic project, revalorized it. He made it, he brought a dignity back to it, he brought an intelligence back to it, a humor, an incredible amount of talent. And he stood up in front of people and said psychedelics are wonderful and potentially solutions for a lot of these terrible problems. And he did it in a time when very, very few people were willing to do that. Virtually nobody was doing that out in public and getting away with it. And Terrence somehow magically basically seemed to have gotten away with it for all those years. The first night I met him, the first afternoon, I asked him, do you understand why you haven't been set up or arrested yet since you're talking about these illegal substances all the time? And he said, yeah, I think it's because I never made more than $35,000 a year, and so when people like that look at the income and the money I'm handling, they just write me off as insignificant and look for somebody else, bigger fish to fry. And the time that I knew him, that blessed him, and he got away with saying the most outrageous things people were saying in the country. And it was very exhilarating. It was very fun, but it was also, there was a lot of people suffering then that didn't have money. We didn't have the internet to make money out of yet. Mm-hmm. We didn't have this whole digital revolution that allowed the creative class to form out of what used to be bohemia. Mm-hmm. But it used to be, if you were a bohemian, you were generally poor. You lived in a city, in a very small place with a lot of other people. And at the beginning of this computer revolution, that's the way it was in San Francisco. People were piled on top of each other, and there wasn't much cash going around until the technology thing broke open that egg, and all that wonderful money came spilling out.
And what we're seeing now, kind of across the board, not necessarily with Terrence's ideas per se, but a lot of the technology and the software and the video editing, and to a certain extent even effects, are sort of the downstream of what you were working on during that time. You and some other artists. There's a guy by the name of Nick Phillip that lived in San Francisco, who I thought was an incredibly visionary artist, and And a lot of these ideas and a lot of these seeds that got planted then have now really germinated deeply into the mainstream.
Yeah, Nick's a great example. Nick did the posters and original design work for Alien Dreamtime. He now does the Imaginary Foundation designs, and he and these other guys were the first people to use Photoshop to start creating rave invitations. And they were the first people to develop a style that was appropriate to Photoshop. It was not about color correction, and it wasn't about technical specifics of a photographic transfer anymore. It became a way to enhance and psychedelify almost any image. So these guys started making this incredible body of work to promote raves and other events that basically taught the commercial art world how to look at Photoshop in a more creative way.
Right.
I can remember being on, I was on an advertising commercial set, earning some money as a set designer guy, or not even designer, just a grunt. And there was an ad agency guy running things, and we started talking about the rave scene for some reason. And the next day I brought him in a stack of rave cards to show him what people were doing with Photoshop, and he was drooling, like they all eventually were, because they saw there was a new way to use this technology where it enhanced the imagination and not just realism. And if anybody, I think that's one of the most important parts of what psychedelic experiences give us. We can realize that almost everything is the imagination. We only imagine. We really only imagine. Consciousness is all about imagination. And we think we're dealing with hard and cold facts and that we're being rationalist. But that's just a story we tell ourselves that's nested inside of a bunch of imagination. Mm-hmm. So the psychedelic stuff was useful for helping people dissolve all these artificial boundaries that had been established. It was allowing people to get together in one place and dance like a tribe. It was a very interesting time. Social experiments were everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And, again, what we've seen as a result of that is the commodification of a lot of those ideas. Wired, which you already mentioned, is just one example of that. But if you listen to almost any commercial now, you'll hear very slick, very sophisticated electronic music, very well produced, at a very affordable rate, and it's just become sort of this soundtrack now it's a commercial soundtrack in our lives. And just like the 60s were commodified, and we have Whole Foods and and yoga and all these things that came out of the 60s, there's been a whole series of media bites in for lack of a better term, pieces of consciousness that have been embedded for better or worse in our commercial lives. In terms of Terrence, he had some incredible insights and some ideas that are, we could spend, just 2 hours alone talking about his ideas. But if you had to take one idea, one salient idea that you really grasped from Terrence and wanted to try to translate that to somebody that really didn't know a lot about him or a lot about his sort of conceptual framework, what would be that one idea that you could impart to somebody that he really understood and grasped?